Good afternoon, and how are you? It is weekend today, so I thought I'd like to explore a total different subject. Still controversial, nevertheless, but totally different. Still political, but it has a kind of adult theme to it, without it being sleazy. There's a lot of articles recently, I think there's one in the Independent, where the quote was, "Horrible feminists are trying to deny men having access to prostitutes or sex services." Now, what is interesting is that these men are arguing that was it not for the sex trade, a lot of men would be out there raping women. So, in a way, they're raping women with consent because money is passed, but they're not raping women without it not being consent, because as long as money is passed, then it's consented. If the money wasn't being passed, then it would have been rape. Now, what is interesting is that before I go to that, right? So what they're arguing is that horny men cannot control their sexual urges and would lead to going out there and raping. Now, this is an interesting sort of position, because most clients of prostitutes are married men. So why would they have the need to go out and rape? I'm not justifying single men going out raping. What I'm arguing is that most clients are married men. So the idea that without the prostitute, men would go out raping, the figures seem to show a contradiction. Now, in this sex research, the sex researcher discovered that when these clients were giving information that the prostitute was held against her will, or they really didn't want to do it, but they were in dire straits, a lot of these men did not care. They continued having sex with the sex workers. Now, my being a male, if I was horny and I went to visit a brothel and I became aware that these women were working against their will, they were kidnapped, they were sex slaves, I could not perform. I'd feel like an animal, I'd feel like a beast. I wouldn't feel right in myself, to actually go through the transaction knowing full well that she's been held hostage, or she's working for somebody else. What I find bizarre regarding sex and trade, whether you are having sex or whether you're making love, you like to believe that you are letting the woman enjoy herself, you're enjoying yourself, and there's pleasures on both sides. When you're sleeping with a prostitute, she's paid to pretend that she's enjoying it. So I don't understand how a lot of these clients would actually sort of have an ego to believe that whatever sexual fantasy, that they're doing, that she's enjoying it. The human ego must be really big. It must be massive. There's no difference to a woman who is dating a man purely for wealth, purely for his money. And he thinks he's Jack the Lad. He thinks that he's really it. But take away the money and she'd be gone. So the idea that he thinks he's good in bed because he's paying for it, it shows men have a sort of strange psychology. They're not all there. Regarding my research, you know, what I find disturbing about the sex trade and sex industry is that it tends to attract a lot of misogynists, men who hate women. And if you can imagine putting yourself in the most degrading position, whether you're getting paid for it or not, does not justify the abuse. And putting yourself in the most degrading position where men want to do horrible things to you. I don't just mean, you know, normal sex. I mean filthy, degrading, you know, sort of stuff to these women, showing their hate that they have towards women. That, you know, and so they find solace, they find safety in going to these places where they can reenact or act out their hate on these women. It's no wonder that it has been said that in the sex industry, no, I mean, I used to be a big fan of Jerry Springer, I used to love his programs, but it's no wonder that most of the women are lesbians. If you are abused by a man like that on an everyday basis, how can you relate to a man's penis? Where the man's penis is seen as an abuse, is seen as a weapon, you know, and then you having to make a living by being degraded, you know, amongst horrible things that they do to these sex workers. And then you're going to go and find romance with the same kind of physical shape that's abusing you and has a penis. It's no wonder they're not born lesbians, but they're so abused inside that they rather go away from the natural to the unnatural. And my philosophy regarding the sex industry, people argue it's always been around, it's always been around. So is pedophilia. It doesn't make it right. So is murder. It doesn't make it right. You know, someone I knew, well, I knew someone I know, he was trying to argue that, you know, homosexuality, you know, it's always been around, and he's trying to argue that it's okay, but it's always been around, you know. But so is thieving, stealing, lying, cheating, adultery. There's always been around since time began. It doesn't justify it, you know. Slavery has always been around. It doesn't make it right. So the idea that we need a sex industry, a large proportion of the sex industry are run by men, and we will never really have an equal society as long as we have the likes of Beyonce, Taylor Swift and Madonna, who take off their clothes. They know what they're doing. They take off their clothes for money and they pretend they're empowering themselves. But who are lusting after them? Not women, who, you know, the sisters, not women. Men are lusting after them. Yet they claim they're empowering themselves. No, they're playing games. They're getting paid. As long as women like that are not selling their talent, but selling their bodies, and they call it music, I'm afraid feminism will be a contradictory. It'll always be a contradiction. As long as women having to sell their bodies for sex, then the concept of women's equal rights is a joke. You know, it's a joke. You cannot have women's equality. I tell you something, right? You show me an industry where handsome men can go out there and just, what do you call it, gigolo, you know, become a male prostitute, and see if there's a big need for it. But it seems to be one-sided. There seems to be a need for women to open their legs and men to come and pay for it. As long as we have the music industry that degrades women and portray women as sex objects, this is not about female empowerment. It's a load of lies. Female empowerment is about covering your body up. And if you want to wear a skirt, you wear a skirt. You want to wear high heels, you wear high heels. But to show your boobs on stage, show your crotch on stage, if it's a 4-year-old children, and you call it empowerment. No, it's not. It's a business. You're making money and you're pretending to, because you feel guilty, you're pretending, oh, sisters empowerment, because you feel guilty. As long as behavior like that exists, or sex show, sex stage, as long as that exists, and the porn industry, you know, and prostitution, then what it shows is that the differences between male and female, like chalk and cheese, is worlds apart. My opinion on this, as I said, just because it's been around for centuries, it doesn't justify it. Without appearing crude, right? What's wrong with self-relief? You know, what's wrong with self-relief and your own imagination? You know, it's almost, we live in a world where people think that you have to poke anything with a hole. We live in a corrupt and depraved, you know, society where everything is sex driven. You know, you got adverts selling cars with a sexy woman on the car, etc. You know, and these images are flashed before people. And people then relate to each other on a sexual level. The advertising industry has a responsibility. As long as we are living in an age where sex, LGBT, homosexuality, pushing sex for the 4-year-olds, then we are defining the world in accord with just sex, not relationships, sex. And that's why we become perverted. My opinion regarding brothels and the likes, it's a very hard subject, because I will tell you why. Hope not, God forbid, but if I was disabled and I've got a sex drive, what the hell do I do? Do I go insane? Do I crack up? There's so many. It's such a grey area. What about disabled people? You know, I read a few weeks ago this sex worker, and all she does is service people who are disabled. You know, so I'm not in any position to tell these disabled people or this woman that what you're doing is wrong. Who am I to judge her or judge the disabled? You don't know what you're going to be like. You know, if one day you woke up and nobody wants you, nobody fancies you, or you're in a wheelchair, or you're crippled. You don't know what we're capable of doing when we're desperate. However, the brutal honesty of this video is that you can never really have an equal society, despite what all these strange groups are trying to push. It's human nature. It's human nature. We will always have divisions. This idea of trying to create heaven on earth utopia, everybody's have their, you know, fair share in the pie, and everybody love each other and there's no division. It's a lie. When it comes down to it, we have to live in accordance with our conscience and try to live in accordance with our moral codes and know the difference between right and wrong. It's a very complex subject, and I hope that, you know, you will leave your thoughts on this. And if you have, you know, used sex workers, please be open. I'm not here to judge you. I just want to find out some different opinions on the subject. You know, as I said, disabled people, they have sex drive as well. You know, should I dictate that they can't use sex workers? What about sex workers who get abused by these horrible misogynists? It's a very complicated subject. As I said, trying to create a perfect world in this sinful and evil economy is a contradiction. Human beings will never create a peaceful world where everybody has a fair share of the pie. It's just impossible. I hope you enjoyed this video.